Welcome to Live Sound for small to medium-sized venues. This is the third video in a four-part series, and in this video we're going to talk about sound capture. That's microphones and direct boxes. To recap the previous videos, in the first video in the series, we reviewed background information, general information, the basics of sound and sound systems. And one of the things we established was that the speakers and the microphones are the most critical components when it comes to determining the sound of a sound system. Microphones and speakers are what's called electromechanical components. They are converting an electrical signal into a mechanical action that creates sound in the case of a speaker, or they are mechanically reacting to sound and converting that to an electrical signal in the case of a microphone. And that conversion, that electrical to mechanical conversion, is not perfect. It colors the sound. And it colors the sound to a much greater degree than anything else. So those are the most critical aspects of the system. In the second video, we talked about speaker systems, how to select them, how to set them up. And now in this video, we're going to go over microphones, and we're going to talk about direct boxes, how to select them, and how to use them. Now, before we get into that, I want to talk about my philosophy about capture, right? You're capturing sound into this system the way I want to do it, and I will explain why and attempt to defend my opinion on this because there are different approaches. My personal belief is that you want one and only one thing in each channel. Each channel on your mix board, if you have multiple vocalists, you have one vocalist in each channel, and only that vocalist. And the reason this is important, right, and I talk about this as, single elements per channel maximizes the control. Why this is important? So say you have three singers. You have Sally, and you have Bob, and you have Sarah. And Sally is too soft in the mix. If Sally's channel is picking up Sally, but also picking up Bob and Sarah, to some extent, maybe a lesser extent, but to some extent, and picking up the kick drum and picking up the bass guitar. When you turn up Sally, all of a sudden, Bob and Sarah get louder. So now you need to go turn them down in the mix. And the kick drum got louder and the bass guitar got louder. Well, you need to turn them down in the mix. So you want to adjust one thing. You want to increase the volume of Sally's vocal. You turn her vocal up, and now you have to go turn four other faders down to accomplish what you want to accomplish. That makes it much harder to get the mix right. And it risks a situation where maybe you can't get the mix right because there's so many things mixed together like this in a particular channel. Now, this brings up where the sort of maybe controversy comes in on this. And there is a school of thought, particularly in the acoustic music community. You don't really see this like a rock band. This isn't going to happen. But in the acoustic music community, you see this, subset of the community that likes this idea of a single microphone. Get a large diaphragm, omnidirectional condenser microphone, and you put it up, and everybody gathers around that and sings and plays their instruments, and that picks everything up, and it's very communal, and they can be very good microphones, and, that's great. And so, this single microphone. The problem with this is achieving an ideal balance of volumes between the different instruments and the different vocalists. If you have a sound person out in the audience that's hearing what the audience is hearing, they can adjust everything and balance it on the fly. Now you don't have to worry about it as the performers, and you can adjust everything. Now, a couple different inputs with respect to this. I did a gig one time, and I basically got browbeaten into this idea that we had to have a single mic pickup. And we had, 10 or 15 different acts over the course of the night. And I was assured that they would all know how to work with this. Well, none of them did. And it was an absolute disaster. And like one particular example, the singer-songwriter gets up to perform. He strums his guitar and sings a song, and the guitar and the vocals are relatively well matched. And it's relatively balanced, and that's all good. Next song, he finger picks. Finger picking is much quieter than strumming, but he sings at the same volume. You can't hear the guitar. And I'm out there in the audience as the sound person, and I can't do anything about it because it's all in one channel. Another input on this and another experience on this, I shoot a lot of video, and I will bring in artists into a, like I'll be at a music conference, and I'll set up a video and audio recording studio at the conference, and I'll bring in multiple artists to record. And in that circumstance, I do not want a lot of microphones in the way of the video. If you think about, you go to a performance and somebody's singing on stage and they have a microphone right in front of their face, it blocks their face. And you look at your pictures you took of a performance, and it's like half the time the microphone is blocking the singer's face. So what I will do is I will put up a single microphone to pick up multiple things. But here's my experience with that, and here's what happens. So I'm going to go through a very specific example, but I've repeated this over and over and over and over again. So I had Kirsten Maxwell, who is a singer-songwriter, wonderful singer-songwriter, plays acoustic guitar and sings. I had Alice Howe, another wonderful singer-songwriter who plays acoustic guitar and sings. And Freebo, who's a very, very famous bass player. He was Bonnie Raitt's sideman for many, many years, and he's played bass with just about everybody who's anybody in music. And he is now a singer-songwriter and also very talented at that. Plays acoustic guitar and sings, or also plays bass guitar. So in that situation, we're going around and they're taking turns doing songs. So Kirsten will sing and play acoustic guitar. Alice and Freebo will sing back up to her. Freebo will play bass guitar. Then Alice will sing, play acoustic guitar. Kirsten and Freebo will be the backup singers, and Freebo will play bass. And then Freebo will play acoustic guitar and sing a song. Alice and Kirsten will back him up on vocals, and Alice will play bass guitar. So the way that I recorded that was I put a large diaphragm omnicondenser mic up, and that was capturing all three vocalists and whichever acoustic guitar was playing for each song. And then the bass guitar went to a little amp sort of off to the side, wasn't really even in the video, but it was just loud enough that they could hear it. But then I had a direct feed for that into my recording system. So what we would do is, like we did the first song, Kirsten would sing, play guitar, Alice and Freebo would back her up, Freebo would play a little bit of bass guitar, and we would do about 30 seconds of the song. And then we would stop, and we would play it back on the monitor speakers. And if the guitar was too soft, we would move the microphone down a little bit. And if the guitar was too loud, we would move the mic up a little bit. And it was really surprising to me that an Omni condenser microphone, that just moving it up and down an inch or two made such a difference in the relative volumes. And if somebody was too loud, we could have them move back or move closer, to balance things. We could have them sing softer or louder, depending on what we needed to do. And we would go through and we'd make all these adjustments. And then we would do another 30 seconds of the song. And we would listen to it again. And we would do this multiple times till we got the balance just right. And we would do the song. When we finished that song, we went to do the next song. Now Alice is playing guitar, and she's the lead singer. We had to do it all over again. We had to go through multiple cycles to get everything balanced. And then it was Freebo's turn. And then we went back to Kirsten. Every single time, it took multiple cycles to get everything balanced right. It's very, very hard. If you don't have a sound person, if you have practiced with single mic pickup a lot, and practicing with it, you can't just do it yourselves too. You have to have somebody out in front of the PA system listening and giving you feedback. Because when you're singing, if you don't have monitor speakers blasting back into your face, what you're hearing when you're singing is mostly you're hearing your own voice through bone conduction in your head, which is not at all what you sound like out in the audience. And so it takes a lot of practice and a lot of work, and you are simply not going to be as good at it. My opinion, and I say this with a lot of experience with this, you are simply not going to be as well balanced as if you have somebody out there actively doing the balancing for you. Plus, somebody's doing the balancing for you, you don't have to be thinking about it, worrying about it all the time. So this brings us to sound capture fundamentals. So again, ideally, each channel picks up one and only one thing. So how do you do that? Okay, well, first of all, if you have to use a microphone, you use a microphone. I mean, there's no way to capture a voice other than a microphone. Drums, you have to put mics on drums. Electric guitars, you could use a direct box. I do not recommend it. I'll talk about this a little more when we get to electric guitars. I think it's important to mic the electric guitar cabinet. Brass instruments, you're going to use mics. Use direct boxes where you can because they provide isolation. Acoustic guitars, mandolins, banjos, fiddles that have pickups, use the pickups, use a direct box. Okay, is an acoustic guitar on a really high quality microphone better than a pickup? Generally, yes, but on a stage in a real environment, number one, the person who's playing the guitar can't move around because they're going to get louder or softer as they move. And secondly, it's going to pick up a lot of other stuff. It's better to just run it through a direct box. And if you have a good pickup in the guitar and a good direct box, it will sound good. Bass guitar, run a bass guitar through a direct box. And keyboards are kind of the poster child for direct boxes because a keyboard, it's an absolutely pure signal just from the keyboard. There's absolutely no way for it to feed back. It's sort of the best and easiest example. And I'll talk about, well, why don't you just run it right into the PA? I'll talk about that when we get to the part on direct boxes. Okay, so now we're going to talk about microphones. And we're going to go through them in a little bit of detail now. So what's an ideal microphone? Well, first of all, you want it to have a tight pickup pattern. You want it to only pick up right around the front of the microphone so that you're not picking up other instruments that are off to the side. You have three vocalists standing next to each other, as we talked about in the example. You want to pick up, if it's Sally's vocal mic, you want to pick up Sally. You don't want to pick up Bob and Sarah, who are off to the side. So if it has a nice tight pickup pattern, it's only picking up right in front of the mic, you're only going to get Sally. Secondly, you want a short reach. You don't want it to reach out a long way. And there is actually a difference in how far they reach. If you have a vocalist right in front of the microphone singing into the microphone, you don't need it to reach a long way. And if it's reaching a long way, it's probably picking up something you don't want it to pick up. The third thing is you want it to pick up the frequency range that's needed for the voice or instrument that you're capturing, but not frequencies outside of that range. If you're miking a kick drum is basically all low frequencies. It's a low frequency thump. You don't want a microphone that has really good high frequency response because there's nothing there from a kick drum for you to pick up. Vocal mics, there's no content in vocals below about 75 hertz. Why have a microphone that can pick up down to 40 hertz or 30 hertz or 20 hertz? That's just going to be rumble and noise. So you want a microphone that's picking up the frequency range you need and only the frequency range you need. This is very important on the stage. These principles, by the way, are a little different than what you're going to have in a studio. In a studio where it's a very quiet environment and a lot of times you're only doing one thing at a time, sure, get a microphone that picks up everything and is extremely good because you're not going to be running into all of these extraneous noise issues you have on a stage. And then the fourth thing is you need the microphone to be able to handle the volume that's produced by the voice or the instrument being captured. Like if you're talking about a kick drum, a lot of drum sets have a hole in the back head of the drum, and you can actually stick the microphone into the hole into the inside of the kick drum. It's incredibly loud in there. You need a microphone that can handle that very high sound pressure without distorting. When you talk about microphones, you look at a microphone, in the specifications of the microphone, they'll talk about the pickup pattern for the microphone. And this is what's called a polar plot, and it's kind of weird to look at if you've never looked at it before. So what we have here is this is to the front of the microphone this way, this is to the back, and then these are off to the sides. And the farther the curve is from this center point, the more sensitive the microphone is in that direction. So if you look at this is an omni pattern, this light green. What it means is it picks up equally in every direction. This is not a microphone you're going to use on a stage very often because it's going to pick up all kinds of extraneous stuff you don't want it to pick up. And in fact, when you talk about monitor speakers and trying to have monitor speakers on the stage, it's extremely hard to have any kind of monitor speaker volume if you're using an omnidirectional mic. The only place that I would use an omnidirectional mic on a stage would be maybe for overhead mics on the drums. And, they're generally not turned up that, they're not usually turned up that high because they're mostly up there to capture things like cymbals, which when you hit them are very loud and really cut through the mix because of their frequencies. Another kind of pattern is this darker green, which is a figure 8 pattern. Again, this is not a pattern you're going to see on a stage very much. It picks up to the front and to the rear. The one thing about this for other applications, when I'm shooting video, I use figure 8 mics. And if somebody is sitting down playing acoustic guitar, their voice or their mouth is not that far from their guitar, right? Because you're kind of crumpled down. They're relatively close together. You want to separate sound vertically. You want to capture their voice separate from the guitar. Figure 8 mics are really good at not picking anything up off to the sides. If you put one up at somebody's mouth and another one down at the guitar one's not going to pick up their vocal very much. The one at their mouth is going to pick up their vocal but not pick up their guitar very much. So they're good microphones for that. The only time you probably see a figure 8 microphone on the stage is if you're using a ribbon mic. And we're going to talk about the different kinds of mics in just a second. The most common microphones on stage are some kind of a cardioid pattern. In the old days, what you saw was all the mics were cardioid, which is this red pattern here. And this picks up very well to the front, and it actually picks up really well to the side, but then it's completely dead in the back. So there's no pickup in the back, picks up out to the sides and to the front really well. If you look at some of the more modern mics, a lot of the classic mics were cardioid. Some of the more modern mics, they tend to be now super or hypercardioid. And that's because you can see both of these, the super and the hypercardioid, both pick up a lot less out to the side. Now they do have a little bit of a lobe in the back, not usually too much going on back there anyway. Although this does have implications for how you set up monitor speakers, which I'll show you actually. I think it's on the next slide. But these pick up less to the side, and then they have a little bit in the back. The thing here is, these mics are easier to work with. They're less likely to feedback. They're less likely to pick up things you don't want them to pick up. And generally, the sort of modern mics on stage tend to be a lot more of these. So I just mentioned this. So this is how you place monitor speakers. So you want your monitor speaker to be sending sound to the performer so they can hear themselves, but not getting picked up by the stage mics. So if you have a cardioid microphone, I just talked about this, it picks up in the front and to the sides, it's dead in the back. So you put the monitor right behind it. And a lot of people don't understand this. Everybody's used to monitors being behind microphones, and they think that's how it should always be. But that's only true for cardioid mic. If you have a super or hypercardioid mic, you've got this little lobe in the back. If you put the monitor here, it's going to go into that lobe. You don't want to do that. You want it to go somewhere where it's not going to get picked up. So you put it over here where it's aimed into the dead spot over here. Now, the interesting thing about this is this monitor is sort of shooting at the performer's face. These monitors are shooting at the side of the performer's head, which is where your ears are. This is actually a little bit better configuration in terms of being able to hear. So you put them off to the sides like this. It's the dead spots of these supercardioid mics, and the performer can hear themselves a little bit better because it's aimed at their ear. All right, there are three main types of microphones you're going to run into. There's dynamic mics, which are the most common microphone on a stage, and we'll talk about why that is. There's condenser mics, which are less common on the stage. You will run into them, and they do have their use on stage. They are much more common in the studio. In a studio, most of the microphones will be condenser. On stage, most of them will be dynamic. And then ribbon mics, which, you probably won't run into very much, but, we'll talk about them a little bit, once in a while. So dynamic microphones, the way these work is they have a diaphragm, and that's what the sound, the vibration, the sound moving through the air hits the diaphragm, causes the diaphragm to vibrate. It's attached to a coil of wire, and it's suspended in a magnetic field. And the motion of that diaphragm and the coil of wire in the magnetic field creates an electric signal, which then gets amplified. And it's really a speaker working in reverse, right? In a speaker, you've got this coil of wire and a magnetic field. You put a signal into it, it causes the cone of the speaker to move, which creates a sound. In this case, instead of a speaker cone, you have this little diaphragm. The sound makes that move, which causes the coil to move, which creates an electric signal. Dynamic microphones, one of their strengths is they're rugged, right? There used to be this joke, right, that people would take, there's something called a Shure SM58, which is a very popular, classic vocal mic. And the joke was people would use them to hammer together the stages in the morning and then sing on the stages into the microphones in the afternoon. Very, very rugged. So they're generally more rugged than their condenser counterparts. So that's one of the reasons that they're popular on stage. Because of the mass of the moving coil, they don't tend to respond to rapid changes as well as a condenser mic, and they're not as sensitive. They don't reach out as far as condenser mics, and they typically have limited high frequency response. Now, there are some very good dynamic mics that have very broad frequency response, but generally speaking, they're not as broad a frequency response as condenser mics. The funny part of this is it's actually a strength in a stage environment, because you can find dynamic mics that are well matched to human voices and use them for that and have them have limited pickup of things outside of the range of a human voice. You can find dynamic mics that are very good at picking up the range of a kick drum and don't pick up much outside of that range, which makes them good for stage use because, again, as I talked at the beginning, I want one and only one thing in each channel. Another thing about dynamic mics is they typically have a natural resonance around 1,000 to 4,000 kilohertz. 1 to 4 kilohertz. And that's where vocal intelligibility is. And this is what's called the presence peak. And generally it helps vocalists cut through the mix and makes them, so that you can really hear them clearly. And generally they can handle very, very high sound pressure levels. Condenser mics use a thin plastic coated film or fat plastic film coated with gold or nickel. So they have very little mass to them. They don't have this big voice coil hooked to them. They just have this little coating. And then something called capacitance is used to sense the motion of that metal coated, very thin diaphragm. So they're more sensitive. They move to the subtlest little changes a little bit better. Condenser microphones require power. So you either are going to have a battery in the microphone or you have to use what's called phantom power. Now, the way phantom power works is on your mix board, it will output power on the channels. The reason that you can do that and not have it interfere with the sound signal is your sound signal is going to be somewhere between 20 hertz and 20,000 hertz. The power that you're putting out on that cable is what's called direct current, and it's actually 0 hertz. So you can put a little filter on the channel when it comes back to the mix board, and you can filter out at the 0 hertz power signal and just have your sound signal and not have it interfere at all. So you can actually feed power out to the microphones, or you can also use that power to power direct boxes if you're using an active direct box, and we'll talk about those in a few minutes. But if you're going to use a condenser mic, you're either going to need a battery in the microphone, or you're going to need to turn on phantom power for that channel, and most mixers have that. Now, the sensitivity of these mics, it's a good thing when you're trying to capture the nuances of soft vocals or acoustic guitar performances, but it makes them more prone to breakage if they're dropped. If you put them inside a kick drum where the sound pressure levels are really high, or even it's possible for somebody to do what's called a plosive, where they just go like pop, 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 pop into the microphone, they can actually damage it. Now there are, more robust and less robust condenser microphones, but you got to be careful about that. As I said, they generally have a longer reach than dynamic mics. They reach out farther. So again, on stage, generally you don't want long reach. The big exception to that is if you're miking a chorus. If you're miking a chorus, and you've got 50 people on stage and you're going to mic the whole chorus with like 3 microphones or 5 microphones or something like that, yeah, use a condenser mic because it's going to pick them up better. They generally have wider and flatter frequency response than dynamic microphones, right? Which is why they get used in the studio a lot. But again, on stage, you don't typically want the frequency response to be too wide. And then the final form of microphones is a ribbon microphone, which is actually a kind of a dynamic microphone that uses a thin metal ribbon clamped between 2 magnetic poles. They tend to have a very sort of smooth and sweet sound to them. They generally are a figure 8 pattern. The places you would possibly see a ribbon microphone on a stage, there are some ribbon microphones for vocals. I actually, at one point in my career, had a couple of Beyer microphones that were ribbon mics that I used for vocal mics that sounded very nice. Also, you might see them on an electric guitar. A lot of people will mix a ribbon mic and another type of mic, dynamic mic, together when they're doing an electric guitar. Some people use them on acoustic guitars as well, although not really on stage typically. Now this part is for performers, and there's a couple of things in this video that are specifically aimed at performers. So one thing here is how to sing into a microphone. If you sing really softly into a microphone, you have a little tiny voice, the sound person generally can turn up the microphone. They can make you the right volume in the sound system, but you are not going to sound as good as if you project into the microphone. Now, I am not in any way, shape, or form suggesting that anyone should strain when singing, blow out their voice, hurt their voice. Not suggesting that at all. But if you can sing from your diaphragm, if you can project into that microphone, you will sound better, and you will make it easier for the sound person. I actually had a situation one night where I was doing an event for the local PTA. They were having this Battle of the Bands thing, and all these bands were taking turns, and it was all these adult bands from people in town, all the parents that, reliving their youth or whatever. But there was one young girl, she was, I don't know, 12 years old, 11 years old or something like that, who got up at the beginning and did a couple songs. And she was incredibly quiet. And I turned it up, but I also recorded it. And when I was working on recording afterwards, I mean, you could hear so much of the crowd noise. This was actually in a bar and in a restaurant, and people were eating dinner and they were making a lot of noise. And that was being picked up by the microphone because I had to turn it up so loud. So to the extent that you can project into the microphone, you're going to sound better. You're going to make it easier for the sound person. The other thing is, think about your position relative to the microphone. If you think about those patterns I showed you, if you're right in front of the mic, it's going to pick you up. If you move off to the side, you're going to get quieter. If you back away from the mic, you're going to get quieter. I do these events and like it'll be an auction and somebody's the celebrity auctioneer for the night, and I'll hand them the microphone and I'll say, look, hold this right up in front of your mouth. You're going to be nice and loud. If you start to let it droop down, the further down it gets, the quieter you're going to be. And they'll start out and they'll have the mic right up at their mouth and they'll be nice and loud. And, 15 minutes into this thing, they're holding the microphone at their waist and nobody can hear a thing they're saying. Because at that point, you might as well have just turned, it's like you've turned the volume control way down. So think about that. Now, you can use that to your advantage, right? You're a singer and you're about to hit some note that you really have to go for to hit it. And you're going to let loose and you're going to be really loud. Back off the mic a little bit so you don't blow everybody's ears out. Now, your sound man probably is going to have a little bit of compression on you, which will help control that situation. But, think about it. right? If you want to be a little bit quieter on a part of the song, you can back off a little bit. If you want to be louder, you can move in a little closer. If you're really going to belt something out, move off a little bit. The other thing is some microphones, in fact, many, maybe even most dynamic microphones have a proximity effect where when you get closer to the mic, it adds more bass. And this is, you get this kind of, some radio announcers actually use that to their advantage. They get this kind of, voice of God kind of thing, And so just be cognizant of that as you move up closer to the mic, you're going to have a little bit more of a bass sound to your voice. All right, now I'm going to talk about specific vocal mics and brands and, impart some of my experience with them. I've done a lot, I've worked with a lot of mics, and I've been doing this for, 40 years now. These are my impressions, okay? Everybody has different opinions about this, and I'm not going to say that, this is the absolute end all of everything. So the Shure SM58 has been around forever. It's one of the most popular vocal mics. It is a classic vocal mic. Many, many, many big rock bands have used it. They're easy to work with. They cut through the mix nicely. They're very rugged. So I talked about people, hammering stages together with them. The SM58 is a cardioid mic. There is a new version of it called the Beta 58, or newer version. It's several years old now, which is super cardioid. So it's got a tighter pickup pattern. It's a little easier to work with. If you're going to pick one or the other, probably the Beta 58 is a better way to go, in my opinion. They have a big presence peak, cut through the mix, but they can sound harsh on some voices. Especially if somebody's really loud and they're really up close on the mic, it can sound harsh. If you have an SM58 or a Beta 58 and it sounds great in your voice and you think it's the greatest mic ever, I'm not saying it's not. On some people's voices, they sound great. And they are, as I said, as a sound person, they are relatively easy to work with. They're also pretty reasonably priced at about $170. So if they sound good with your voice, great. But when I do gigs, most of my gigs nowadays are 20, 30, 40 acts over the course of a day, one right after the other, no sound checks, just go up and play. I want to put a set of microphones up that are going to work for men, they're going to work for women. You can get close, you can get far away. They're going to sound good for everybody. This is not going to be my choice in that situation because, like I said, they can sound harsh on some voices. Now, there are companion mics to this. There's what's called, so the SM58 is the vocal mic. The SM57 is the instrument mic of the same era. And the Beta 58 is the new version vocal mic, and the Beta 57 is the new version instrument mic. The SM57 is a classic instrument mic. It is the go-to mic to this day for electric guitar and snare, right? You see a band like on snare and electric guitar, you're going to see these everywhere. They're very rugged dynamic mics. SM57 is cardioid, Beta 57 is super cardioid. Some people use these for vocals. They're not vocal mics per se. They don't have the presence peak. Some people like them for vocals. If it sounds good in your vocal, again, I'm not saying you shouldn't use it. I can tell you the Beta 57 in particular, if you have a woman singing into it and they're eating the mic, it is awful. And there is nothing you can do about it. I spent an entire night with a woman eating in a Beta 57. I was a fill-in sound person at a place one night. They called me at the last minute. I walked in, they already had mics up. I thought about telling them to take them down and putting mine up because I brought some mics with me. I went with it. This woman's singing into the fifth Beta 57, and it was awful. And that's a very well-known thing. Again, I love the SM57 for snare and electric guitar, not what I would use for vocals. Use a vocal mic for vocals. Another Shure mic, Beta 87A. Now this is a condenser mic, and I put this in here because it's a condenser mic. Rugged enough for stage use. Right? This is a pretty rugged mic. Super cardioid. It's very feedback resistant. Very easy mic to work with. Gradual presence peak rise. It cuts through the mix. Minimal proximity effect. This is a very high quality general use vocal mic. I own In my wireless mics, I mostly use wired mics, and in just a second I'm going to tell you what my wired mic of choice is. But I have several wireless mics that I use as well. Like if I'm doing an auction event or something like that, and sometimes on stage even I use the wireless mics because it's very convenient to have a mic you can move around anywhere without having to worry about the cord. My wireless mics are all Beta 87As, and they are excellent mics. I really like them, but they're $260. And, I own my go-to wired vocal mic. I own like 10 of them. And the ones I use are $170. So paying an extra $90 for 10 microphones, that's real money. So, without further ado, this is what I use. Audix OM5. It's a dynamic mic. It's rugged, hypercardioid, so it's a nice tight pickup pattern. Some presence peak, but it's a relatively smooth one. Reasonably priced at $170. And I have used these on so many gigs with hundreds and hundreds of artists. Men, women, loud, soft, close to the mic, back from the mic. Very easy to work with, very feedback resistant. Works really well. I have never found anyone where I said, oh, wow, they really don't sound good in that OM5. So very, very, very good quality microphone. Is the Beta 87A a better microphone? Maybe a little better, but not $90 better, especially when I'm buying a lot of them. Probably my favorite vocal mic is this Sennheiser E945. Again, dynamic mic, rugged, super cardioid, very smooth response, excellent sound. It's kind of a OM5 with a little bit warmer, better sort of mid bass, if you will. But again, more expensive at $200. I didn't want to buy 10 of them. And I owned a bunch of the OM5s already, which brings me to another thing. If I'm going to put six, it's very common for me to put 6 mics across the front of the stage because I'm going to have a whole bunch of different people singing into them and taking turns and everything else. If I'm going to do that, I generally like them to all be the same mic because then I can set all the channels the same. I know in my head, in fact, with my mix board, with the mics that I use, I have a set of mics I use all the time. I have a set of direct boxes I use all the time. I know how to set every channel before anybody sings anything or does anything, which is really nice when you're, again, going to have 20, 30, 40, 50 different acts, one after the other. But this is a very nice mic, and I have worked with this many times, and these are very nice as well. Okay, miking a drum kit. Drum kits are the most complicated thing you're going to mic. And in this table, I have some examples of good drum mics. There are multiple options besides these. Before I go through them, one thing that can happen with drums is sometimes, like I mic'd the drum kit one night, and every time the guy stepped on the pedal for the kick drum, it rang for like ever through the PA system. So one thing I carry with me is I carry these little damping pads that you can stick on to the head of the drum to dampen it a little bit. Now, ask the drummer before you start sticking stuff to his drums, but it's good to have some way to do that. Now, a lot of times, kick drums, like the drummer actually stuffs a blanket or a towel or something into the drum, but in this particular case, it had solid front and rear drum heads, so you couldn't do that. Some examples of microphones here for this. So like floor toms are like the biggest tom. They have the deepest sound. The Sennheiser MD421 is kind of the classic tom mic and is really, really good for floor toms. It has a very big diaphragm. It picks up low frequencies really well. It's a very good mic for this. You can use an SM57, a Shure SM57 as well for this. Perfectly well. There are also some smaller mics now that clip onto the edge of the drum that are purpose built for this. So, there's lots of good choices here. This is just something that I've used and had really good luck with. For the hi-hat and the overhead mic position, you're going to want to use a condenser mic. This AKG Perception 170 is a cardioid pattern condenser mic. that has good frequency response out to like 20,000 hertz and works very well in the hi-hat, works very well overhead where you're using the microphone to pick up the cymbals. For the kick drum, the sort of go-to mic, the classic mic in the industry is the AKG D112. Very strange looking mic. It kind of looks like a football. But it picks up low frequencies, and it doesn't pick up like a lot of high frequency stuff. It's for kick drums. Works very well on, you can mic cellos or upright basses with it as well if you ever needed to do that. Shure makes a very nice beta kick drum mic. I forget which number it is, but Shure makes a good kick drum mic. Audix makes a very good kick drum mic as well. So there's multiple options here, but this is the one that I use and I've had really good luck with. On the snare drum, SM57. That's like the classic, use that on a snare drum. And on toms, the SM57 or the MD421 can work very well. Now I'm going to go through 3 different ways of miking a drum kit. So here I've got a relatively small drum kit, right? You've got a kick drum, a snare, a hi-hat, and 1 cymbal. In acoustic music, this is a fairly common drum configuration. The rock and roll guys are going to have a lot more stuff. In this case, I've got my kick drum mic in front of the kick drum here. If there's a hole in the head, then it will be sticking into the hole in the head. I've got an overhead mic up above the drum kit here. It's kind of between the cymbal and the hi-hat to try and pick up a little bit of both, but mainly it's picking up the cymbal. And then I've got a snare drum mic over here pointed right at the snare, although this is probably going to pick up a little bit of the hi-hat as well. So this is my SM57, this is my D112, this is my AKG Perception 170 overhead mic here. So 3 mics, and you can mic a kit with 3 mics and do a pretty damn good job. And even if it's a bigger kit, if you're smart, the most important part of the drums are to get the snare and the kick drum. And then you've got 1 mic to do all your cymbal stuff. Just sort of think about where your cymbals are and try to sort of centrally locate it. Now here's a bigger drum kit. So now we've got a hi-hat and a snare over here. We've got 2 cymbals. We've got 2 toms. These are rack toms, so they're mounted above the kick drum. And we've got a floor tom. So now what we've done is we said, okay, we're going to mic the snare and we're going to mic the kick drum because we said those are the most important. We're going to put a mic on the tom over here, on the floor tom to get that sound. And then we've got 2 overhead mics. One's over here and it's picking up the cymbal and kind of the toms, and the other one is over here and it's picking up the cymbal and this cymbal and the hi-hat. These overhead mics are typically going to be up high on stands sort of pointing down at the kit. They're cardioid mics, so they pick up to the sides pretty well, so you can point them down from up high and they'll pick up a lot of stuff. But you always, when you're positioning these, think about where they are, particularly in relation to the cymbals, so that you make sure that you get a good balance of the cymbals. If somebody has a ride cymbal, people that use ride cymbals a lot of times will use them a lot. If somebody has a ride cymbal, you want to make sure your overhead mic is pretty close to the ride cymbal because it becomes very, very important to the sound. The hi-hat's very important also, but you're going to get some bleed into the snare mic, and then this will pick up the rest for you. And then this is our, okay, let's really do it up. Let's do 8 mics. And, and geez, if you have a really big kit, it could be more than 8 mics. But in the kind of stuff that I do, I've never used more than 8 mics in a drum kit. In fact, I almost never use 8 mics in a drum kit. Now I've got a mic right on the hi-hat. I got one right on the snare. I got one on the floor tom. I have mics on each of the rack toms. I got my kick drum mic, and now I have 2 overhead mics, and they're mainly just picking up these 2 cymbals. Although they pick up sort of all of the kit to some extent, and they give you some extra sort of ambient sound. So they do add nicely to the overall sound. Again, this would be, my condenser mic, my AKG Perception 170. This would be my Shure SM57, AKG Perception 170. My AKG D112 kick drum mic, couple of SM57s on the toms, my Sennheiser MD421 over here in the floor tom, and then again another AKG Perception 170. Now, you need to think about phase a little bit, and particularly on drum kits. And, I didn't show this here. I showed some fairly simple configurations for miking the drums. It's not unusual to mic a snare drum from the top and the bottom. If the kit's really tight and you're having a hard time getting your mic in there, you might mic the snare drum from the bottom. But you have to think about phase. And what happens is when you hit the snare drum head with the drumstick, it causes the head to move down. If the mic is above the drum head, it's moving away from the mic. If you have another mic underneath the drum, it's moving towards that mic. So the mic on the bottom and the mic on the top are 180 degrees out of phase with each other. And if you sum them together in the mix, they can actually cancel each other out, completely or partially, and they can do all kinds of strange things. So what you do is on your mix board channels, there's typically a button you can press that changes the phase by 180 degrees. So you say, okay, I got a mic on the bottom, I got a mic on the top. I'm going to put the one on the bottom 180 degrees out of phase. So you just need to think about, when you hit the drum, what direction is things going to move relative to the microphone? Make sure that your microphones are all getting things in the same phase. So I mentioned this before, miking an electric guitar. So, electric guitarists put a lot of effort into getting a particular sound. And they do this by picking a guitar. The guitar has certain pickups. The guitar amplifier, amplifier for a guitar amplifier is a bit of a misnomer because a lot of them are actually an amplifier and a speaker together in one cabinet. Or you have an amplifier and it's hooked to a speaker in a separate cabinet, but they're working together. And the speaker, the amplifier combination, the guitar, any pedal boards the guitarists use, they all work together to get a certain sound coming out of the speaker of that guitar cabinet that is what the electric guitarist wants. If you put a direct box on the cable coming out of the guitar, which you can do, you're going to lose all of the sound and coloration of that amplifier and speaker. A lot of the really good classic guitar amps are tube amps, and tube amps, if you overdrive them, the tubes tend to distort in a way that's very musical and pleasing and gives you this, the whole Jimi Hendrix sound was built around that and things like that. So the best thing to do is to put a microphone in front of the speaker cabinet and capture it that way. The most widely used microphone for that is the Shure SM57. Other choices, Sennheiser makes this thing called the E609, and it's kind of flat. And you can actually take a mic cable, stick it through the handle of the guitar amp, hang it down in front of the speaker, hook your E609 on there, and have it sort of flat sitting against the grill and not even need a mic stand. So that's kind of convenient. It's a pretty good mic. It's a lot like the SM57 sound-wise. Works pretty well for that. You also, by the way, in a pinch, could use one on a snare drum if you needed to. You can use them on brass if you need to. The E609. SM57, by the way, if you're ever miking brass, you can use that on brass. The Sennheiser MD421 that we talked about for big toms also works really well on like saxophone or trombone or things like that. And then the Royer R121, which is a ribbon mic. You can use that on electric guitar. You can use that on acoustic guitar if you were miking an acoustic guitar. A lot of people in the studio will take a Royer and a Shure SM57 and put them both on the electric guitar and mix the two together. If you put the mic in the center of the speaker, it's the brightest sound, and at the edge, it's the dullest sound. And if you're not sure where the speaker cone is because it's behind the grill, just take a flashlight and kind of shine it in there, and you'll be able to see the speaker through the grill and figure out where to put it. Okay. Direct boxes and interfaces. So instruments, when they have pickups in them, they output what's called an unbalanced high impedance signal. And I'm not going to get into all the technical details of what that means. You don't really need to know it other than it's a high impedance unbalanced signal, which has two problems. One, it's not really what your mix board wants. And secondly, if you transmit it a long way, they're very susceptible to noise, and you'll usually lose like high frequencies and the signal will degrade. So what you do is you come out of your instrument with your instrument cable, and I'm going to go over the different cable types in the fourth video in this series. But these are typically 1/4 inch plugs on the ends of the cables. And you go into a direct box, and that takes the unbalanced high impedance signal and converts it to a balanced low impedance signal, which your mix board likes, and you can send them for really long distances without them degrading. Direct boxes can be passive or active. Okay, a passive direct box is just like some kind of a transformer. It just transforms the signal from unbalanced to balanced, changes the impedance, doesn't boost it at all. If you have an active direct box, that will actually put a little bit of a boost on the front end. It needs a battery or it needs phantom power, but it gives you a little boost on the front end. I like active direct boxes for acoustic instruments such as acoustic guitar, mandolin, banjo, fiddle, anything like that. A lot of acoustic guitars these days have a pickup in them that actually has a battery, and they're amplified a little bit at the front, and they have plenty of output, and it's not a problem. But once in a while, you get somebody with a passive pickup in the guitar, and it has a very low output. And if you send that a long way, it can get noisy. So if you have a little bit of a boost on the front end from a active direct box, it just makes life easier. And there's reasons, some people like passive pickups because they don't have to worry about the battery in their guitar going dead. I mean, I had a guy doing a gig one night, and I had to keep turning his channel up and turning his channel up as the night went on in his acoustic guitar because the battery was dying, and eventually it died. And his particular pickup system, the battery was inside the guitar, and to change the battery, he had to take all the strings off the guitar. So all of a sudden, we had to mic his guitar instead of using a direct box. Now, he was performing by himself, and it wasn't really a big deal to mic it, but he had to hold still the rest of the night for his performance, and he really didn't like that. That can be an issue. But, again, for these low output instruments like that, I usually use an active direct box. I will use a passive direct box for things like bass guitar, which tend to put out a higher signal, or keyboards, which put out really high signals. Passive direct boxes are fine for that. If it's a really good passive direct box, even on a really quiet guitar, it's probably going to be okay. I just, find it's a little easier to use the active direct boxes. Now, what you typically will have on an active direct box is you'll have a button you can push in to cut the signal level going into it. And I usually start with those buttons pushed in, but I know that if somebody hooks up to it and we're doing the line check and they're getting ready to play, and I'm looking and I'm like, oh, I don't have enough signal from this guy. Before I turn the mix board up all the way, I'll have my stagehand pop out that pad that reduces the volume on it, and now it'll be fine, and off we go. So it gives me that option to get that little bit of extra boost at the front end. Because again, when I first got back into doing sound, I got away from it for a while. It was a hobby. When I got back into it, I was a pro in the beginning, but I sold a lot of stuff. I get back in. I bought some really inexpensive direct boxes, and if I turned up the channel too much, there was a lot of noise. The other thing I found was sometimes they would ring. Like somebody would play acoustic guitar, and you get this weird ringing on it that didn't belong there. Now I have radial JDI passive direct boxes and J48 active direct boxes. They are awesome. Just built like tanks, super rugged, super high quality sound, don't color the signal at all. Everything you want in a direct box. Only problem with them is they're $200 a piece, and I own a lot of them. They're expensive, but in my opinion, they're really worth it. Now, this is another one of the things in this video that is aimed at performers. This is a huge pet peeve for me, and this is something that I think is really important for performers to understand. So think about it for a minute. If you're a performer If you're an abject failure as a performer, you most of the time won't be playing through a PA, so this won't matter. But if you have any success at all, and hopefully you have lots of success, but if you have any success at all, you're going to spend most of your time playing through a PA. So if you're going to spend most of your time playing through a PA, you ought to make sure you're going to sound good doing it. A lot of artists spend months, years finding the perfect acoustic guitar. I've got my Martin, D28 or whatever it is, and it has exactly the tone that I want, and it sounds awesome. And you spend no time at all on the pickup. And you know what? That pickup is going to determine how that guitar sounds through the sound system. And if the pickup is a crappy pickup, the best guitar in the world is going to sound like crap going into the sound system. Can the sound person help with that situation? Some. If you're playing through my PA, where I'm doing, 30 and 40 and 50 acts in the course of a day, I don't have time to dial in each person's guitar. So what I do is I have really good flat direct boxes. I have a really good PA system that is going to accurately distribute out to the audience whatever you feed into it. And it's up to you as the guitarist to give me a good sounding guitar signal. If it's really awful, will I try to do something? Sure, but there's only so much I can do. Get a pickup that sounds good. There are, some big names in this. Do some research on it. Get a good pickup, because it's as important. It's absolutely as important as the sound of your guitar, because going into the PA, it's going to determine the sound of your guitar. So in conclusion, capture one and only one instrument into each channel. Use direct boxes where you can, microphones where you must. Get good direct boxes. Again, I like to use active direct boxes on the low instruments that could potentially be low output, passive direct boxes on the instruments that are going to be higher output. Although, again, like a JDI radial direct box, it's going to work on anything. And a J48 actually will work on anything too. You just might have to put the pad in. Control what each microphone picks up by selecting tight pickup patterns and microphones that are well suited to what you are capturing. The classic here is that D112 for a kick drum. It picks up low frequency and doesn't pick up high frequency. And that's what you want it to do. The other thing, in the next video, we're going to talk about this. One of the things you can do in your mix board is you can do filtering. You can put a high-pass filter. I put a high-pass filter on every single channel. Now, on the bass guitar and on the kick drum, it's probably set to 40 hertz. But my speakers are only good to 40 hertz, so I don't want anything going to the speakers below 40 hertz that could potentially damage them. On vocalists, it's going to be like 75 hertz because there is no vocal content below that. I've had male vocalists say to me, "Oh, well, for me, you can't put any high-pass filter in a channel because I can sing really low." Yeah, no. No, you can't. Not below that. And a lot of female vocalists, they don't even go below 100 or 150 hertz. I high-pass filter acoustic guitars between 100 and 200 hertz because I find that it actually cuts a lot of boominess out of them and makes them sound a lot better. And it keeps a lot of crap out of the channels. Again, I'll talk about that more in the next video. But the key here is you want the microphones picking up. You want flat frequency response and good sensitivity in the range of frequencies you're trying to capture. Limited sensitivity outside of that frequency range. Now, to that point, what frequency range do you want to capture in each thing? Well, we talk about that a little bit in the first video, so you can go back and watch that. On this page right here, you see the URL for the ScottenJones.com production page. There are some resources on there. You can download a sheet that shows you the frequency ranges for different instruments, talks about high-pass filter frequencies. It talks about, things you can do to play with the sound of those instruments a little bit. So there's a really nice sort of cheat sheet that really helps with equalizing and filtering and picking microphones that you can download from there. The slides for this video, you can download them there. You can download the slides for the other, the first two videos, and in the not too distant future, we'll get the fourth video up, and that'll be up there as well. So, I strongly suggest, go to this page, take advantage of everything that's there. And thank you for your attention.